In this video, we're going to take a look at elements of ecosystems. And so by the end of this video, you will be able to define and explain the term ecosystem, as well as be able to identify biotic and abiotic factors found in ecosystems. So before we get into what biotic and abiotic means, we need to start by defining what an ecosystem is. And so when we're talking about ecosystems, we need to kind of go back to our classifications with our spheres. And so if you recall, a biosphere is all of the living components of our Earth, as well as the environment that they interact with. So that's kind of the big picture. But if we need to talk about smaller components within the biosphere, we have to narrow it down a little bit. And so we have other words that we can use to classify those smaller bits of the biosphere. So if we go one level down, that is called a biome. And so a biome is a specific type of climate and geography and its living components. And so our biosphere is made up of many different biomes. Now, we know that not every place on the earth is going to look the same. And so some sort of examples of biomes could be, for example, the tundra, where there's lots of ice in the tundra, but there aren't really that many trees. And so that kind of makes it unique in terms of what is in its specific kind of environment. You could also have a rainforest or a temperate forest, and there you would have lots of trees and you might have no ice or very little ice. So that would look very different from the tundra. And even a rainforest versus a temperate forest could look very different because a rainforest generally has a lot more rainfall, a lot more humidity involved in its climate versus a temperate forest. Now, we can take this one more level down and we can narrow down to a specific location, and that is what we call an ecosystem. So an ecosystem is defined as all the living components and their environment in a very specific region. So we could, for example, take Oakville Park, which is not far from where we're at, and that would be a specific ecosystem. Now let's take a look at some examples here and just kind of go through these terms so that we're very good with them. So starting out, our first sort of picture at the top here is a picture of a temperate forest. And this is a biome because temperate forests have their own temperature ranges. They have their own general kind of amount of rainfall or snowfall that you might expect. And so biomes are actually classified based on these characteristics. You can find temperate forests in many different places around the world. So that's what our second picture here is showing us, is where all of the temperate forests are found in green here around the world. And you can see that as long as they fit the classifications, so they fit in with those temperature ranges, with the ranges for rainfall or snowfall or whatever other classifications are characteristic of that biome, they can be classed as that particular kind of biome. And if we narrow in on one specific location within this type of biome, so if we kind of pinpoint where we're at in Oakville, then Oakville Park is a temperate forest, but it is a very specific location. And so this would be then an example of an ecosystem. Okay, so now that we have our sort of big picture words and what our definition of an ecosystem is, we need to talk about what makes up an ecosystem or what the components of an ecosystem is. So there are many kind of ways we could talk about ecosystems, but one of the most basic sort of definitions or ways that we can divide up an ecosystem into two main parts is through biotic and abiotic. So let's talk about what those terms mean. Let's start with biotic factors. So biotic factors mean all of the living components of that ecosystem. That includes all the organisms, as well as their remains when they die and pass on, as well as anything they produce or their waste as well. So, for example, urine, which is produced as a waste product from humans, which are living beings, would still considered to be a biotic factor because it is a waste product from a living being. All of the non-living components are abiotic factors. And so these all have physical and chemical components. So physical kind of means based on like your five senses. So they might have a specific temperature or feel to it. So we'll see some of those kind of examples as we're kind of taking a look at abiotic factors. Chemical means that, maybe chemicals are a part of it or there are reactions that are taking place. So those are just kind of some basic definitions. So these are things like temperature, wind, water, etc. Those are all non-living components. Now, if you want to be able to tell the difference between biotic and abiotic, a little trick here to remembering it is bio means living. And anytime you put an A in front of something in biology, usually what it means is it means that it's not that thing. So abio means not living. So that might help you keep the two straight as you're learning these two terms. Okay, so let's practice this now. I want you to pause the video and try and class each of these things as biotic or abiotic. All right, welcome back. So let's go over the answers really quickly. Just very quickly, the top four are biotic factors. The bottom two are abiotic. If we take a look at the bottom two really quickly, the sand is abiotic because it is part of the lithosphere. It is essentially made of rocks that are just broken down over time. And so they've never been living, they've never been part of a living thing, so that is an abiotic factor. Same with ice. Ice is abiotic. It is water in a solid form. It's part of the hydrosphere. It's never been living, so therefore it would be classified as abiotic. Now the top four, some of them might be a little bit tricky because bacteria really is the only living organism here. So that is biotic for sure. If we take a look at dead leaves, the reason why this one is biotic is because even though it's dead, it came from something living. It came from a living tree. So that means that it would be biotic. Milk is the product of mammals, of cows, of goats, of various different mammals. So because it's a product of a living thing, it's considered to be biotic. And finally, hair. Hair grows on living things. So even though hair itself is not living, it is a product of a living thing, which makes it a biotic factor. So that's it for this lesson. Let's now move on to our next task.